Hello, my name is Jennifer Lewis, and I am submitting this video reflection to the Department of Education at the University of Kansas. I am being led by Dr. Sean Smith. This video essay is to document my feelings and processes about creating an ePortfolio. I have been asked to assemble 12 artifacts of learning which span my career at KU, as well as to provide reflections about what I had learned since submitting each of those artifacts. I will begin by describing my feelings as I reviewed each of these artifacts of learning. From the navigation page of my ePortfolio, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but you would click here on the teacher interview where it says SPED 730, and that takes you directly to a brief description of what the actual artifact is. Linked is the video where I actually performed the teacher interview, and then you can read about my reflection by clicking this link. All of these links are working, but for now I'm going to hit the back button so that I can share with you my feelings. Artifact 1 was a teacher field interview completed during SPED 730. The artifact was chosen from a list of required artifacts to be submitted by students completing the teacher track of courses. At first, when I was reviewing and reflecting over this assignment, I felt grief-stricken because it was one of the first major assignments I had completed that fell during the singularly most challenging event of my entire life. But then my outlook switched almost immediately to a feeling of pride and accomplishment. I read through the feedback I had received from my professor, and I realized that I had been asked if my assignment could be used as an exemplar for future students. Watching the video of my field interview helped me to recognize how valuable my mentor teacher is as a resource. Listening to his answers to all of the questions I had about his experience working with students with disabilities, his comfort level utilizing the universal design for learning principles, and just seeing his joy for teaching was something that made me feel hopeful for myself as an educator. It made me feel as though all of this will eventually start to click and that I will feel like a confident, prepared, skillful, and joyful teacher myself someday. For Artifact 2, one would click here where it says Tier 1 Behavioral Intervention Video for SPED 730. Like the last one, it gives you the full name of the class that this was completed for, when it was completed. It has a link to the video that I had created and a link to my reflection. Again, all of the links and buttons work, and it will take you right back to the landing page. My second artifact was a Tier 1 behavioral intervention video created for SPED 730. This is one of the two optional artifacts that I selected. I decided that I would choose one artifact that mattered most to me as a student and one that reflected who I am as a teacher. This is the artifact that was chosen as a reflection of me, the student. During this class, I got to know an imaginary student named Tony Hale, and I became very familiar with his case study. From a student perspective, this was the assignment that I had the most fun creating. It was silly, but it covered examples of Tier 1 behavioral interventions, what makes them universal, and it gave me examples of why teachers might forget to implement these strategies. When reading my feedback over my reflection, my professor helped me to realize that this is the type of presentation that could be useful for my students as well. If I can explain a lengthy concept to other adult professionals using props and sound effects and fun visuals, then I could do the same for my students. Creating interesting video lessons, especially short-form content, could be a way that I could help my current and future students remember concepts learned. Again, from my landing page, you would go to the chalkboard and click here on Case Study Final Presentation for SPED 741. That will take you to this page that tells you the completion date, the full name of the course, the description of the assignment. You can click on this link to watch the video I had originally submitted, and you can click this link here to read my reflection over the process of creating that assignment.
The case study final plan and presentation for SPED 741 included a narrated slideshow presentation sharing my findings on a student in my school who had been given a pseudonym for the sake of anonymity. This is another required artifact submission for the teacher track students. My feelings when reflecting over this assignment were a mixture of curiosity and excitement. The student I had chosen for this original assignment is a person that I continue to serve this year. Looking over the challenges this student was facing last year helped me to understand how valuable learning to properly identify their reading strengths and needs really was. This student is practically a different person now because I was able to be a better teacher for them after learning how to recognize specific clues for how they have learned to read. For example, I didn't know that this student struggled with tracking words, meaning that they don't fluently read groups of letters from left to right and up to down. Just a simple change like using a bookmark to help them keep track of where they are in their reading has helped immensely. The feeling of excitement came from seeing the actual progress that I had made since I took this class. The feeling of curiosity came from having not remembered this assignment at all. It all came back to me, of course, after watching the video and reading through my essay portion, but one of the main drawbacks about taking 8-week courses is that I don't always remember what I have learned without intentionally looking back at my older work.
From the landing page, you would access the fourth assignment by clicking here on the laptop where it says FABI SPED 743. This gives another description of the class, the assignment, the due date, and you can click on either of those links to either see the actual assignment or to read my reflection about it.
For artifact number 4, a feeling of ease washed over me as I reflected on my functional assessment-based interventions final assignment for SPED 743, which was another required artifact submission. This was the next to last course I took in this program, or required course that I took in this program. So I had only recently completed the assignment a few weeks before I was expected to reflect over it. Obviously, I didn't learn very much since the assignment, but I felt at ease while reviewing the assignment because my interlocal had just released a flowchart for documenting target behaviors and has finally created a team of people who might conduct a functional behavior assessment. Every part of this class was completed as a group assignment, so I got really used to working with a team and communicating clearly and respecting other people's time constraints. Also, learning how to request support when I have attempted to tackle more than my share. Not only did I have a real student in my real classroom who began demonstrating high-frequency behaviors while I was learning how to measure and record frequency and duration, but I was also able to comprehend the steps on our newly implemented flowchart because it resembled what I was learning in the moment. Before this class, I believe I would have found the process very confusing, if not daunting, and that's why I felt a sense of ease.
From my landing page, you can reach artifact number 5 by clicking over here on this pink portrait labeled IEP Analysis SPED 775. Like the others, when you click on it, it gives a full description of the course name, the assignment name, when it was completed, and it offers both a link to the artifact and a link to my reflection.
Another required artifact submission was an IEP analysis for SPED 775, and it made me feel reflective. I had completed the process of learning how to write a solid individual education program after all of my IEPs were written for that school year. So I was not able to put what I had learned into practice immediately. While I was learning how to write effective goals, I reflected on the goals I had already assigned to my students. I had chosen goals from a goal bank based on search results that I had obtained when looking for annual goals relating to specific disabilities or deficits that my students had. They weren't necessarily very personalized to the student and came from a deficit mindset. I looked at what their disabilities were rather than what their abilities were in order to determine what their needs might be. Over the course of the creation of this artifact, I learned how to write goals based on what a student can do, what they want to do, and what they and their families dream they will do after high school. Reflecting over this project made me automatically more reflective over the goals that I write for my students when I write IEP goals this year and in upcoming years.
Artifact number 6 can be found on this wall by clicking on this portrait named Literacy Skills SPED 775. Like the others, it describes the assignment, the class, the due date, and offers both links to the assignment itself and my reflection about the assignment.
Artifact number 6 had me reflecting over a teaching video that I created for SPED 775, and it evokes feelings of overwhelm and nostalgia intermittently. This artifact was a required submission for the teacher track listing. I studied to become a general education teacher in history, government, and social studies. My first year of teaching and the year I completed this course, I had become the functional academics teacher for a district I had no experience in. Not only was I not well versed in how to create accommodations and modifications, but I had never worked in a no textbook school before. So I wasn't adequately prepared to find out that none of my classes had an identified scope and sequence listed in our district resources. I had to learn how to teach English language arts, learn how to teach evidence-based interventions, and learn how to create lessons and all the associated activities completely from scratch. Reviewing this video made me realize that I was constantly researching how to teach and how to write lessons and how to create engaging content for my students night, day, weekends, over breaks, on vacations, on holidays, when I was homesick, when I was at home grieving my mom. And it nearly broke my will to teach. Being reminded of just how difficult my first year was reminded me of that extreme overwhelm that surrounded me during my first year of my master's program. But then I felt feelings of nostalgia. I liked watching the video and seeing that I was willing to try more new things that year because everything was new to me. I felt brave using a software that I had barely gotten to know for a final presentation, which was graded. I missed my old students and how fun they were to work with. I also thought about how I no longer use the slide deck lesson plan as like a crutch to help me work out the timing of each section. But I also thought that I might want to incorporate them more often as a way to provide students with visual guidance for each lesson.
Artifact 7 is located just above this Jayhawk, and you can click on where it says Virtual Blended Learning SPED 841. It'll take you directly to the page where I've included information about the course, the due date, the assignment itself. I included the blended unit lesson plan and my reflection here.
Artifact 7, or the Virtual Blended Learning Unit for SPED 841, was chosen from a list of required artifacts to be submitted by those on the teacher track like myself. I felt rather excited when reviewing this assignment. This was one of the most difficult projects I have created so far, but it was also the one that I felt the most enthusiastic about. I was a para-educator when COVID-19 closed down the school that I was working at. I was also a college student who was forced out of the classroom and into the virtual learning environment. I personally helped deliver asynchronous services to students during this very uncertain time, but I also supplemented my own learning with the videos that other professors had created for classes I was taking, and it helped me make it through two of the most difficult years of college. Creating a Google Classroom full of self-paced activities and assessments made me feel excited and wanting to learn more about creating asynchronous learning materials, especially because I personally profited from this asynchronous learning format. The students I work with have a much wider range of abilities than the general education teachers normally work with. For me, learning how to create asynchronous materials can help me ensure that all of my students are learning and growing without having to prevent some students from making progress or pushing others through material faster than they're ready for just to keep all of my students on the same track. It was exciting to look back on what I had created because I had offered the fictional students I was teaching so many different ways to learn and express to me what they understood.
Artifact 8 can be found down here right below the chalkboard. And when you click on that link, it takes you to this page that explains more about the assignment, the course, the due date, and again offers two links, one to the assignment itself and the other to my reflection.
Artifact 8, which is my final paper reviewing Tier 3 interventions to support both learning and behavior for SPED 843, made me feel as though a light bulb had gone off. And I chose this artifact off of the list of required artifacts for teacher track students. I felt like a light bulb had gone off while reflecting over this assignment because I connected the dots between what I was learning about Tier 3 interventions and a student that I personally had worked with before becoming a full-time teacher. It had never occurred to me that student behaviors can be directly linked to, if not caused by, a lack of proper instructional support. It also made me think about my fictional student from my FABI assignment, who also was dealing with a lack of challenge, appropriate challenge in his class, leading to unwanted behaviors. So both the real life student and the fictionalist student were displaying high frequency behaviors due in part to not receiving intellectual stimulation from their assignments. My team was able to decrease unwanted behaviors in our fictional student by increasing the number of depth of knowledge questions that they could work on when they were finished with all their classwork. The real-world student attended an alternative school for students with Tier 3 behavioral needs and had just been identified as gifted during his 7th grade year. This student completely changed dramatically in verbal communication, rule following, and adjustment to changes in routine after simply receiving academic interventions to support his high ability to achieve. I appreciated the opportunity to reflect on those two instances because it helped me connect to my learning in a way that the actual assignment did not.
Artifact number 9 can be accessed by clicking up here on this green portrait labeled Philosophy Statement SPED 854. It takes you to my link to my philosophy statement, information about the course and the assignment and the due date, and you can read my reflection here. You can go back by clicking this button.
Artifact 9, which is my philosophy statement produced for SPED 854, asked me to develop a personal philosophy statement conveying what collaboration in special education means to me. This assignment was chosen from the required list of artifact submissions for teacher track students, and I debated whether or not to revise it. Though the original assignment earned a glowing review from my professor at the time of submission, I felt room for growth when I read through the originally submitted philosophy statement. I attended an IEP boot camp professional development seminar earlier this school year, and in that session they had us repeat the phrase, "Teachers don't write IEPs, IEP teams do." And this increased my awareness of the importance of communication among team members when formulating an IEP. In my reflection submission, I rewrote a shorter, more direct version of that statement that I felt reflected my current understandings and would be more shareable. It also included that phrase from my professional development seminar. And it goes like this: each member of an IEP team must contribute and be heard in order to form an efficient educational plan. It requires a collaborative, concentrated effort to ensure that a student is considered with a holistic approach when being evaluated for a learning exceptionality. Special educators do not write IEPs, IEP teams do. Therefore, careful, deliberate collaboration with every individual on the IEP team is required to identify a student with an exceptionality, develop an educational plan, and execute the plan. Collaboration is mandatory.
Artifact 10 is this chartreuse portrait in the upper right-hand corner labeled Transition Planning SPED 856. It will also take you to a page that explains more about the class, the assignment, the due date. It allows you to click on the actual assignment itself, as well as my reflection over the assignment. Again, you can click the back button to return to the original landing page.
When reviewing the final running assignment for SPED 856, I felt a sense of readiness. This assignment was chosen as an optional artifact, which I believe reflects me as a teacher. As a high school case manager, all of my students are old enough to be involved in their own transition planning and must be invited to their own meetings. I used what I learned in this class to help me write IEPs that match well with a student's future plans, their hopes, their dreams. The I'm Determined website resources that we used in this course are what I currently use to help my students plan for and lead their own IEP meetings. When choosing a second elective assignment to submit as an artifact for my learning, I knew immediately that I wanted to choose something from this class because I've really been able to put into practice everything that I've learned. Choosing which assignment to submit was the difficult part. When reviewing the second part of our running assignment, I noticed that this submission showed me and those reviewing me that I am able to communicate effectively with other team members because of the interview of my transition coordinator was an essential component of this assignment. It also shows that I can find resources to share with parents during the IEP meetings that are not necessarily required, but offer them a greater understanding of what the transition steps are for moving beyond high school. I pride myself in the fact that I proactively share documents for parents to look over and consider, such as alternatives to guardianship, information about work assistance programs, and I connect them with community resources beginning from their 9th grade year. Other teachers in my building share applications for pre-employment training services, and obviously they offer the required IEP paperwork, but they do not always ensure that parents have enough information to begin planning for life after high school. The completion of this assignment and reviewing it for my reflection gave me a sense of competency and readiness to graduate from this program that I had not yet felt previously. Although I've been a case manager for 2 school years already, this gave me a true sense of confidence in my skills. And yesterday I found out that my transition coordinator is leaving our district and will be getting a brand new transition coordinator that has never worked in that role before. So I'm glad that I reflected over this and feel so competent and confident because I know that I will need to help lead our next transition coordinator in the processes used at my school.
You can find the next artifact here by clicking on Self-Determination SPED 875 in orange just above the laptop. It'll take you to the page that describes the assignment and offers links to both the assignment and my reflection. And then again, you can press this back button to navigate back to the landing page.
My self-determination product for SPED 875 is almost a video performance of the student-led IEP presentations that are now a regular opening to my IEP meetings. So it allows the viewer to see into the process I go through to help prepare my students to lead their own IEPs. It is a required artifact submission for the students taking the teacher track. While reviewing and reflecting over this submission, I remember feeling gratitude for the repetition. This assignment was actually an original submission and a revised version delivered to my instructor at the same time. It felt so repetitive because we were learning how to use the I'm Determined website that I was already simultaneously learning how to use with my students in SPED 856. So at first when I was completing the assignments, it felt redundant. Later, as I began to fall in love with the I'm Determined platform and the way that it helped me facilitate conversations with my students about their own goals and dreams, I became very grateful for this repetition. I use all the tools on the I'm Determined website to help me get to know my students better, to help me create and lead lessons on self-determination, and to help us both formulate a functional living or transition goal to add to their IEP. It helps them create a presentation to aid them in leading their IEP meetings. Due to extenuating circumstances surrounding the due dates of parts of this assignment, I had to teach one of my students the full self-determination curriculum and help them create a presentation to share what they learned. And then I had to do the exact same thing all over again with my own son because of the conflicting timing of the assignment due date, the Thanksgiving break at my school, and some unexpected absences on the part of my student. So this extra practice felt exhausting in the moment, but I'm feeling nothing but gratitude for having had the chance to try the same lessons on two very different students from two very different ability levels. The reflection over this submission truly helped me recognize that I can adapt coursework to students with a variety of abilities.
From the landing page, one can access my 12th and final submission right here in blue on the bottom right-hand side by clicking on Assessment for Learning SPED 875, and it does take you to the page that explains the lesson, the journal reflection that I originally submitted, and then down here at the bottom, the reflection that I created while making this ePortfolio.
My video lesson produced for SPED 875 was chosen from the list of required artifact submissions for teacher track students. It covers the process of selecting and teaching an evidence-based practice to support students in mathematics. Reflecting over this final artifact made me feel accomplished. I have always created lessons that attempted to match skills outlined in the state standards, but that doesn't mean that I've always searched for evidence-based practices for how to teach those skills. Reflecting over this assignment had a different effect than the previous reflections. Other reflections allowed me to see how much I've grown since the original assignment was completed, but in this case, reflecting over the steps I took to complete the assignment changed my future plans for teaching skills. I've gone back to my dynamic learning map essential elements standards, which I'll call EEs, and I've gone back and I've written essential questions to help me determine which activities can best teach and measure learning for each skill. I've added some supplemental videos that include evidence-based practices for teaching each skill. I've written in essential vocabulary for each EE to help me plan the pre-teaching and the note-taking graphic organizers that I'll create prior to introducing each new unit's activities. Reflecting over the inclusion of UDL principles in my original assignment has forced me to intentionally include at least 3 additional resources to each unit in order to provide my students with multiple means of learning or expressing what they've learned beyond the usual online activities that my school has provided to me. I think the process of reflecting over the steps I took to finish this assignment has done the most to inform how I will plan units and lessons in the future and how I will continue to grow as an educator. Having this reflection makes me feel more accomplished because it shows me that I really have learned and grown from this master's program. I was already a licensed teacher when I began. I was already in my own special education classroom without a mentor teacher watching over me. I knew that I had what it took to be a competent special educator, but this helped me feel as though I could eventually become exceptional. Next few clips will go over my artifact selection and reflection process. We're asked to share our approach to revisions on the original assignments or give our justification for why they were not revised. So one assignment was revised despite getting glowing feedback. I decided to create a shorter philosophy statement for Artifact 9 because the original submission was too long for me to use in any other context. And I wanted to include a phrase that I had picked up in a professional development seminar that I had attended since completing the assignment. For some artifacts, a revision was not possible. For example, some artifacts were teaching videos or personal interviews that could not be recreated. On other assignments, full marks were awarded and there was no feedback received indicating where a revision should take place. For the former, I decided to reflect on what I would have done differently were I to complete the assignment again. For the latter, I tried to include the feedback that I did receive if I received feedback. In general, I feel that I personally benefit from thinking about how I would approach the same assignment through the lens of what I had learned since finishing the course, with the exception of courses I had just finished within the last few weeks. Reflective point of view. In general, I would consider most of my reflections to be defensive in nature. I am not simply reflecting over my assignments and what I've learned for my own benefit. This is a graded assignment which must satisfy the demands of my professor. As such, I will be considering his perspective and questions he's asked from the feedback I've received in my previous assignments in order to properly defend what I've learned, defend whether I've adequately reflected, and defend the choices I made when deciding whether to revise previous assignments. Though we generally regard defensiveness negatively, I think taking a defensive position toward my reflections is allowing me to reflect more critically. Creating the ePortfolio. So before beginning my master's program through the University of Kansas, I do not remember ever creating an ePortfolio before. But this is not the first ePortfolio I've created, so I'm not a complete novice, but I wouldn't consider myself to have more than cursory knowledge of how to produce one. My first step in creating this ePortfolio was to gather the links and document all of the required artifact submissions and choose 2 extra submissions to include. When considering the 2 alternates, I wanted one that reflected who I am as a student and one that reflected who I am as a teacher. To represent myself as a student, I chose the assignment that I had the most fun with and that I wanted to share with others. To represent myself as a teacher, I chose the assignment that reflects a tool that I actually use and which has helped me to be better at planning IEPs. Helping my students to be self-determined and make plans for themselves is such a massive part of how I support students. These students have always received intensive Tier 3 supports, and I've used this tool to give them a sense of agency in their own planning that I'm sure they have not experienced before. Reviewing and reflecting on the assignments and assembling each artifact and reflection into an ePortfolio forced me to try something new. I had submitted 2 options originally for feedback and approval. One utilized a software called Prezi, and the other one, the one that I've shown you in this video, is similar to a Bitmoji classroom. A classmate in one of my other classes had created a Prezi ePortfolio in SPED 875, and I remember loving the way that it looked, so I wanted to try my hand at it. It was visually appealing in a way that most of the other platforms I had used in the past was not. The second mock-up I created, I fashioned after a Bitmoji classroom. I used Google Slides because this is a platform I consistently use in my own teaching practice. So creating this slide deck allowed me to work with features that I had not used before, such as making clickable buttons as a way to navigate the pages. And I was able to personalize the landing page with an illustration of myself and a Jayhawk and colors that I like. But I did reflect back on what I had learned from creating slide decks for other classes in my undergraduate program. And something that was hammered into me is to keep the slides looking consistent and use a neutral color pattern because it's visually easier on the eyes. So I tried to make the entire presentation easy on the eyes while making the landing page more creative and exciting and fun and colorful. So I tried to blend my enjoyment of creating something exciting and my viewers' needs of needing something neutral and pleasant to look at. I had some help in making creative choices. So I polled my current students and my current paraeducator to see which changes and additions they preferred. So after receiving feedback on my ePortfolio mock-up submissions, it was clear that I had confused my professor by submitting 2 possibilities. So I followed up with an email to explain that these were 2 completely different offerings, and I simply wanted feedback on which one was closer to what he had envisioned for this assignment. But sadly, I never received any replies to my email or the comment on my assignment, so I had to make this decision myself, and it was really hard. Though I wanted to continue working with Prezi, there was no possible way to create a true landing page. It was exciting to learn how to use this new software program that I had never personally created content with before, and I did enjoy the Prezi format better, but I ultimately chose the Bitmoji classroom because it appeared to match the rubric expectations slightly better. When being true to myself, I will always choose technical compliance over novelty, expression, or taking a risk. We need risk takers in special education, but we also need people like me who are sticklers for technical compliance. Even reflecting over which ePortfolio to submit as my final draft taught me something new about who I am as an educator. The iterative process is not coming from revising old assessments, but rather by imagining what I would have done differently or how I've connected to my learning and my lived experiences in the classroom. In some cases, I did not receive any feedback over the actual assignment, and that has forced me to think critically about my own work from the perspective of someone who evaluates the work of others. My main takeaways. So creating the actual mock-ups has gone very well for me, in my opinion. I've used other website building tools in the past, and I always had trouble with each of those previous attempts that I didn't experience this time around. Prezi's format was easy for me to learn, and Google Slides is a product that I already had comfort with. What I like about the Google Slides is there are some permanent products of my students on the website, and I would like to be able to unpublish it when I'm finished with this assignment. This allows me to do so. But both options allowed me to create presentations that I found visually appealing. Writing my reflections has not gone so well. I felt constrained by the length of requirements. We were asked to write only 1 to 2 pages of reflection, and yet I've received 4 pages or more of feedback for each one, asking me for more detail, even though I've used up every possible character. So I found myself struggling with attempting to be simultaneously detailed and succinct. I very much looked forward to the one-on-one meetings with my professor in order to gain more insight into their thought processes so that I can achieve both an opportunity to reflect and an opportunity to earn a grade that I can be proud of. However, my attempts at reaching out for feedback were never replied to. So this has caused me to search for feedback from others so that I could have an outsider perspective to help me understand where I could clarify my thinking and my writing more. I would argue that the only difference between how I have perceived the process of creating the mock-ups and the process of writing the reflections comes down to subjectivity. I felt more positive about the assignments that I've created that haven't received feedback yet because I know that I have technically met all of the rubric requirements, and therefore I can feel satisfied with my work. But after receiving feedback, I have to experience disappointment sometimes. The subjective nature of how I perceive my work versus how it's perceived by others explains the difference between what I consider having gone well and not gone well. Overall, I hope that my final submissions allow me to thoroughly and successfully explain my process of reflection over the course of the creation of this ePortfolio. Thank you so much for your time and your effort in reflecting and offering feedback to me.